Well, start off. I think not got too many responses, so I'm presuming that the audio is loud and clear. So just take a couple of minutes here before I hit the presentation directly. Why infrastructure and how infrastructure benefits the entire cyclical chain activities for economy as a whole has been a well-known fact. Therefore, whenever we are talking about L&T, and this is just an example again, and no references to stocks should be taken as buys and sells. Clear compliance requirement at this point of time. But whenever we are mentioning L&T as an example, we always speak that it is a reflection in terms of it being the barometer on how the economy moves or how the economy is moving. So infrastructure is specifically for developing countries like ours is a core moot point, is the basics and the basic that is required for ensuring that the engines of development are running at the right pace, and how the pace is getting executed from a corporate perspective, whether it's a public-led enterprise or a private-led enterprise. Ultimately, the developments that are happening on the infrastructure side, and it's a very broad aspect, right? So road developments form part of infrastructure development, port developments, airports, which will get developed, how rural activities are getting played out, inland waterways as a source, again, uh, as a corollary, power, so electricity generation, electricity supply, data is fine. Data is everywhere at this point of time to reach from both postpaid and prepaid subscribers for rural India. How railways and the connectivity of railways, which has been a well-known fact from an Indian context perspective, and the usage thereof. Amenities when it comes to hygiene factors, availability of water. So whether there are adequate facilities that have been provided on all those aspects, and therefore that becomes a very holistic part in terms of how these developments are taking place. So you can add up in terms of logistic requirements that are required to take the entire value chain, or from a supply chain perspective, right from our ports or urban centric cities and towns, right into the hinterland. Therefore, the supply chain mechanism, cold chain warehouses, so all these logistic cold chain providers also become part of the infrastructure chain. And again, what we have been speaking about in terms of the general development that is required to holistically carry this forward. The dedicated freight corridor, I think it's a great step forward that would reduce when it comes through ultimately over the next few years in terms of congestion that is happening on the existing railway line. So it will be a dedicated platform or a dedicated line that can actually transport or ferry freight, whether it's EXIM or domestic freight, and the internal supports that are required with cold chain warehouses along the line, connectivity to different ports along the line, which would make things a lot more easier for providing activities across the country as well. To mix it up as well, I think you can also add uh, cement activities. So a lot of players will need cement. So I think indirectly, I think it also depends on how these activities are getting played out. So whether you're talking about port development, infrastructure development, internal road development, I think a lot of sectors will also get affected very positively. And ultimately, as infrastructure starts building through, as I said, as a combination of all these factors, it's ultimately the demand dynamics which will also start picking up, because as the supply chain inherently and coherently picks up and becomes a complete full circle, the plausibility of getting goods or services far quicker to other locations. And though we are living or expected to live in a digital era in the next few years, I think the need for certain basic amenities will still carry on and will still keep on happening. And therefore, the entire issue has always been in terms of the demand led cyclicality not picking up. But with all these issues, if they get resolved over a period of time where the conscious effort has started happening, as an investment from the public side and support from the private side, and also through the PPP routes. I think there is every sense that uh, discretionary incomes will also start moving up as demand pickup will also start happening in a far more non-constructive manner going forward. Uh, and somebody's just chatted that there seems to be a perpetual issue. So again, I think I'll just raise my hand again. I think you guys are hearing me out, right? Because a few participants are getting some issues with the mic. So I would request MotoG, I don't have the name of the user. If you can check the mic at your end, because a lot of participants can, at least the responses that I've got, they can hear me loudly and clearly. And I'm speaking very loudly and very close to the laptop as well. So now directly go to the presentation and just share the screen with you for the presentation. Yeah, so just a normal disclosure and a disclaimer. Any stocks that are discussed here are just examples for the sector as a whole. It should not be construed whether it's a buying or a selling research recommendation. Now, as I said, and as a precursor, what has happened in terms of uh, the note that I gave out in the initial remarks that I had. Uh, let's go to the budget for a minute and see what kind of allocations have been done in terms of budgetary proposals for the sector as a whole. Every time within the budget allocations, you always hear whether any sector should be given infrastructure status or not. Now, broadly, as I've defined, you can club a lot of activities as part of infrastructure, because ultimately, when you're doing all these activities, sub activities, as I said, for certain sectors, consumption of cement, consumption of steel, consumption of iron, for example, and many other activities related to that, when you're doing a lot of infrastructure development as a whole, whether it's ports, airports, roads, etc. I think would need all these elements to come and bind together. So there has always been a demand from a lot of the ancillary sectors that you should be given infrastructure status as per Section 80IA of the Income Tax Act. Now, why do they need and why do they ask for such justifications? Is because of the tax uh, perspective and because of the deductions on the tax front that these sectors can get. So before every budget, leaving aside the core sectors which come through, you are expected to see a lot of demand coming through for a lot of other sectors when it comes to infrastructure demand or infrastructure status under the relevant sections of the IT Act. But I think the core element here, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, also has been that it has always been a driving force from the public exchequer. By this, I mean that the government spending which comes on the sector or for the sector as a whole, either through PSU undertakings or the tendering that is delivered in terms of private players or private operators expected to participate in terms of either building airports as an example, where we've already seen privatization happen a few years back, or whether you're talking about roads. So the tenders that the Ministry of Roads and Highways or National Highway Authorities passes through, and the bidding process that happens for a lot of roads, whether it's under the EPC mechanism or the hybrid annuity mechanism, all these perspectives that are given out is because of the private participation, where the private capex comes through, and it becomes a lot more easier for the government coffers to concentrate on different other sections of infrastructure development. Port development, again, you've seen a few ports actually in private hands, and there is a lot more that needs to be done here because of the urgent need of mechanizing all our ports. A lot of our ports, unfortunately, whether on the western or the eastern coasts, are still using a lot of old processes and systems. So the entire mechanization in terms of what we see, uh, say for example in the developed world, and how the entire process has happened, I think those steps also need to be taken into account. You've already also seen, for example, within the oil and gas space, exploration activities and tenders which have come through in terms of the new wells or new exploration in fields that can be explored and drilled. Inland waterways, also a lot of floats and tenders have come about. Uh, Railways, what we have been hearing for the past 1 week, right, in terms of privatization, and that is expected to happen as soon as 2020 to 2023 in the next 2 to 3 years. So how the steps are taken, how the bureaucratic processes are cut off, and how effectively the execution will take place. As an example, again for the railways, because infrastructure uh, for the railways also needs to be improved quite significantly. If private operators are expected to run, how will be the positioning in terms of pricing? What will be the mechanism in terms of private operator vis-a-vis public operators on different routes? And therefore, I think the entire perspective in terms of getting things on track through correct and efficient and seamless execution becomes key. Power as a sector, we've already seen uh, right from UPA 2, when the ultra mega power projects of more than 4,000 megawatts that were announced and that were delivered through a bidding process, that a lot of private players uh, attempted to bid for that. They also got through the bids. Unfortunately, it was a very cyclical kind of a story which is still playing out in terms of dues not coming through, classical story in terms of receivables still getting stuck up, and efficiency is not getting run through, both in terms of the final tendering price that they delivered per kilowatt hour that they will generate, and the expectations that they binded this up with coal arrangements, say in countries like Indonesia, where the royalty tax was announced and which caused a huge upheaval in terms of landed coal cost. And therefore, the entire equation went for a spin. At the same time, we know what the situation of the discoms is at the current juncture. And there have been sincere attempts that have been done in the past as well, and attempts which have been done in the recent 21 lakh crore policy, where 90,000 odd crores is expected to get meted out by PFC REC towards the discoms, and the discoms can pay off uh, their payables, thereby alleviating the pain on the receivable side for a lot of power generators. Uh, when we continue with all that, I think these were some of the key announcements that were done, and therefore the steps are in the right direction. How we execute this is extremely critical and extremely important. If I just take a look back at history, and if you would have seen, if anybody are by any chance history students, any of the industrial revolutions that have taken place, whether you talk about the United States, whether you talk about a lot of European nations at hand, it significantly changed the way the entire processes started happening into those individual economies as well. Now, we as a country have tremendous potential when it comes to land, when it comes to resources, when it comes to labor availability, and the recent electricity generation that we've also got in terms of capacities, whether it's thermal or the non-thermal part in terms of renewable energy as well. I think there is tremendous scope that can provide support to industrial needs as well as residential needs. At a critical time like this, when specifically you're looking at opportunities that can come our way, specifically when the entire globe is looking at other alternatives to China. And yes, other economies have probably geared up. And I read these articles about how India has lost a chance and how other economies have probably taken the mantle in terms of opportunities from China. But you look at their market capitalization sizes. So whether you talk about Vietnam, whether you talk about Malaysia, whether you talk about Indonesia, or even a small country like Cambodia, for example, I think all these economies are restricted to a certain extent in terms of all the abundant factors that India has at play. And therefore, the entire scheme of Atmanirbharta, Make in India, which was also announced a couple of years back, and the entire cut down of processes that are expected to happen, we can have a significant say as government spending will keep on happening, specifically in terms of their private expenditure, or the expenditure when it comes to the capital account as well on the exchequer's part, and public expenditure and private expenditure also expected to come through. Therefore, I think if you're able to deliver in the next 2 to 3 years, what has history taught us in terms of industrial revolutions? whether in the US or the other economies as well, there is significant scope of traction. And as I said in the opening remarks, once we can address this and it starts happening far more seamlessly, the supply side relates into the demand side dynamics as well. And that can take our significant and that can take us significantly higher in terms of the purchasing power parity theory, the PPP theory, as discretionary incomes will start moving higher and the per capita income shall start showing robust growth on all these counts together. So I will not allocate more. I don't want to read through this slide, but you can see what the government targeting has been over the last few years and in the last budget in particular. So transport infrastructure has received a huge allocation of 1.7 lakh crores in the budget. They're looking at economic corridors of 9,000 odd kilometers. NHAI is expected to monetize 12 highway bundles. There are other packages in terms of Delhi, Mumbai, Nagpur, Mumbai, and other two packages which are expected to get completed by 2023. Chennai Bengaluru expressway scheduled to start. Almost 22 to 25 odd thousand crores, as I said, has been allocated to the power and the renewable energy sector. 100 odd airports in by 2024 to support the UDAN scheme. On top of that, what has also happened in terms of allocation that you are seeing in terms of urban and rural housing as well. So the number of units that are expected to get built through over the next few years will also have a significant say in the way we approach all these activities taken together. A lot more allocation has also happened in terms of hinterland or the rural roads or the last mile connectivity that we are talking about. The availability in terms of Jan Dhan, the availability in terms of the different socio-economic schemes, whether you are talking about Manrega, whether you are talking about the food security bill. And there can be a question mark and debate that can get raised in terms of how our positioning will be, specifically from a fiscal deficit perspective in a pandemic situation like this. I think this year is going to be an exceptional year. And therefore, even if public expenditure comes through at a very, very reasonable pace and clip, private expenditure is still expected or will be expected to remain soft because private players will definitely start cutting back in terms of a lot of the other expenditure that is not required, and cost optimization will ensure that they defer their expenditure either to the second half of this year with the expectations of economic activity showing some signs of resemblance or in the worst case probability in the first half of the next financial year. Therefore, I think all these activities, as I said, in the right place, and these are extremely essential and extremely critical if we want our GDP to grow at a certain clip, consistently perform how the others had done during their industrial revolution times, and stand on top when it comes to delivery of products and what we've got in terms of deliverables. Because services is where we stand out from the IT part. And there, I think our dominance might very well continue. So, IT and formulations in terms of generics as well as API exports on the pharma front, I think a lot more can be done. And if we are able to execute this well, I'm pretty sure that the next decade, in the next few years, the base will be set up for a huge quantum jump from Indian GDP and an individual PPP perspective as well. Now, this has been from the economic survey that we pulled out on how the entire uh, balance sheet dynamics as a snapshot has taken place. So there have always been supports in terms of uh, budgetary allocations, always been in terms of budgetary allocations which have come through, and therefore what kind of borrowings are expected to take place and what kind of investments do the private sector also put through is extremely critical. Now, we've already seen that even before the pandemic had started, we had constraints in terms of revenue collection for the government, whether direct or indirect. Now, the borrowings that the government also does on a gross and a net borrowing scale from the market also determines how the fiscal situation of the country will be, and how sovereign rating agencies are looking at the entire borrowing mix and the borrowing program that the government is entailed to do. So any substantial or expansive borrowing programs obviously means that you are adding on in terms of your interest obligations, because ultimately government also has to pay off interest in terms of the money that it borrows through, and the expectations in terms of the hit that it can take from a GDP perspective as well as the fiscal deficit is concerned. On the other hand, it also needs to balance out, and therefore infrastructure development is key in terms of pumping up our exports, reducing our reliance in terms of a lot of imports that we are still doing, though we've got resources at our end, and therefore protecting our current deficit balances as well. Just an example here again, look at coal, abundant resources that we've got in the country, and even even if we are moving to cleaner and renewable energies like solar, wind, hydel, for example, the need for coal as a thermal perspective will still continue over the next few years for a country like ours. And though we've got abundance of that, the evacuation issues, the execution issues still ensure that we import coal even now. Look in the case of urea as well. I mean, as an input item, extremely critical in terms of fertilizers, and specifically in terms of the NPK fertilizer, the need of urea is extremely critical and well wanted. However, again, I think we're importing substantial quantities of urea even at this point of time. Our reliance of oil is well known, and that is a known fact. But again, did we have or can we build in enough resources or enough capacities to store oil when it comes to an all-time low level that it did witness a few weeks back? Because that then gives us strategic advances in terms of strategic reserves that we can hold up and again create a huge impact even if oil goes up higher, to have strategic resources at a very low cost. Therefore, I think the need in terms of public spending, which always has been the crux and the backbone of infrastructure spending, still holds true. Private might get pulled back, maybe for this year as well, but there is expectation that with government policies becoming far more conducive for private investment and for public-private partnerships, you might see a lot more investments come through as we move along in the next few years. Now, there is also the element of demand risk. Why I say that? Because again, when you're probably talking about this pandemic in general, there has been the case of a complete lockdown, which has ensured that there were no collections involved. Therefore, the entire perspective in terms of a lot of sectors at play, whether you're talking about the road sector and a lot of road players which get connected because of these issues and factors at play, you're obviously going to see issues because of all these factors. On the power front, industrial and commercial demand is huge, and with 2 months of absolute lockdown, you're going to see further pain happen on that front as well. So on the right hand side, just a observation that we've drawn out in terms of the end users of power by the consumer segment. So the industrial is the largest, domestic follows suit, and you've already seen what has happened in Mumbai, right? Huge electricity bills have come through because of a lot of work from home and everybody logging on to their systems. And again, the usage of electricity multiplying in the peak summer season with everybody staying home and working from that part as well. Agriculture around 17-18%, and commercial forms around 8%. There is also a supply side risk which comes through. The labor migration will elevate the stress. What we've seen and what a lot of transcripts that I went through for a lot of companies, whether the ABBs, the Siemens, even L&T, they said labor availability is going to be critical. A lot of labor has gone back, as we've seen during the pandemic. There has been some sense of resemblance because 50-60% of operations have started, but to reach almost the optimal capacity, it will still take a few months. And everybody is largely expecting that labor will come back after the monsoons are over, that is after the next 2 or 3 months, and where there is sufficient clarity in terms of how the pandemic is also progressing and whether we've seen some cure on the vaccine front as well. Therefore, the human capital is very, very crucial, and we've seen that, and that has posed a huge supply risk for a lot of road companies and road developers as well. whether EPC or the HAM or the HAM player as they call it. They've also mentioned similar situations, and they've said labor is to the extent of 50-60% on sites, and for achieving around 70, 80 or 80, 90% of labor availability post monsoons is how they see activities playing out. Therefore, I think the supply side issues will also crop up in execution, creating cash flow problems, and that might have a huge say in terms of how the entire dynamics will play out for this first half and for all probabilities in this financial year, as earnings on an annualized basis are assumed and calculated. Liquidity risk is also huge because, as I said, when both demand and supply side risks start coming through, the element of cash flows becomes a little bit of an issue. A lot of companies on the infrastructure side depend upon debt. It's also a mix of debt and equity, which is internal accruals from their internal cash flows, along with debt that they probably take. And the ideal ratio is either 60-40 or 70-30, with debt being on 60 or 70 on the higher side. That accounts for a large part in terms of their borrowing mix. And if the fixed asset turnover is not expected to happen, or the execution is not able to happen at an optimal level, and fixed costs are still expected to remain at the same level, I think the under absorption of fixed costs and the working capital requirements that are expected to also take place for carrying out the normal business activities are going to take a toll on cash flows. Therefore, the moratoriums that have got announced and introduced, though I think might alleviate pain for a quarter or two for these companies, both these issues should start coming back, and that poses a risk in terms of the liquidity issues itself for individual corporate balance sheets in the overall context of things. Now, I did mention this, but you look at the chart that we need to go through. So the energy deficit and peak deficit in percentage terms is fluctuating quite significantly. Now, the bailout package, again, a step in the right direction. How does that play out in terms of generation, and what does that play out in terms of the overall efficiencies for the sector? I think it's only time that will come through and tell us in terms of reported numbers. Again, in terms of road developments, the total investments in new highways is estimated at a huge 5.35 lakh crores. So the entire Bharatmala project that we're talking about, and which is very, very critical in my opinion, is extremely key in terms of our overall infrastructure developments. Because what we've also seen and observed and read through, that as roads get developed, and we've seen this in the Western world, in a lot of emerging economies, so I think the size of that economy might be very, very small compared to India. A complete infrastructure that is developed and created, as I said, creates the last mile connectivity. So supply side and demand side, both issues gets addressed quite appropriately and adequately. And therefore, the implementation and execution of this phase is extremely critical. So the BOT-led growth or the HAM-led growth is going to be extremely important and pertinent as well. Similarly for the power sector, so I think they have come up with a plan to create a real-time market for electricity. What will happen in terms of having quotable quotes in terms of realistic rates in terms of buying or selling of electricity will then become very, very transparent, and therefore I think the industries who are consuming or the end users who are consuming this from an industrial or a commercial perspective will have far greater leniency in terms of knowing what their costs are, and therefore assuming how much of an hit will they take in terms of carrying on business activities as far as electricity or the need for power is concerned. Now the Uday 2.0 is aimed at a financial turnaround, so this has been another conscious attempt to turn around and restructure DISCOMs as well. The privatization of coal blocks, the commercial mining that we are hearing about, I think that is also very, very essential on the points and factors that I pointed out. And it will bring far more efficiency for a lot of players, whether they are ferrous manufacturers who use coal in the normal business activities. And if they can bid for that, it also ensure that government coffers are filled up because of royalties and the mining fees that they probably receive in terms of the auctions of mines that they will do. Plus the advantage for the companies in terms of the captive coal usage that they've got and efficiently running their operations as well. So again, the capital investment that is expected is 33,000 crores, and that does help the exchequer as well. Uh, Before we hit briefly on terms of how a few stocks within infrastructure space are, are are getting affected or are placed at this point of time. The development that has happened, as I said very briefly on the railways front, is also a very positive development. When you're talking about 350 odd rail operators coming through, private routes being opened up, and investments expected to come through on the rail infrastructure side, because private players can sense a lot of the huge business opportunity here, because you've still not reached that stage of a lot of rural India actually using aeroplanes and flights and the affordability thereof. And therefore, railways, which has been our connectivity source from urban to rural India, I think as railway players and private players come through, and as their investments come through, the upgradation happening for the infrastructure space on the railways part as a whole as well, I think that creates a huge upheaval. Therefore, as I said, there are a lot of subsectors also attached to this, which can come under the aegis of infrastructure development as well. As I said, cement players, power, the power cable suppliers, for example, because you need probably that into the requirement to be done as well. The need to have resilience in terms of local power equipment manufacturers, or even manufacturers for the balance of parts that are required for plants. Power cabling, as I've already mentioned, and also the maintenance that is required. Shipbuilding, ship repairs, we've got the best facilities that are there that need to get explored. Roads, power, coal mining, we've discussed all that right now. And therefore, there is huge scope for a lot of sectors and ancillary sub-sectors as well, which can get positively impacted and implicate and if the implementation is done in a right and a resourceful manner, I think the next few years can be India's years as well. So again, in the opening remarks that I said, L&T has always been known as a barometer of the Indian economy. तो इसका मतलब क्या है? What this means is that how L&T will perform means how the economy is performing. Why do we say this? Because L&T is present in most of the sectors that the Indian economy is, or any economy is positioned. So infrastructure, for example, look at that, almost 55 odd percent. Look at how the other elements in terms of infrastructure development, and each and every element is largely covered. Defense, hydrocarbons, services, power, heavy engineering, shipbuilding, and you name it, and L&T is present. Therefore, I think the exact crux or the bottom line or the tagline that comes to L&T कि L&T है तो इंडियन इकोनॉमी कैसे चल रही है इसका प्रभाव दिखता है, which means that how L&T is placed looks at how the Indian economy is placed going forward as well. Similar comments in the transcript and the numbers that they got reflected. Order wins were very reasonable. Huge order book that L&T has at this point of time. The staff cost has gone up, the finance cost has gone up, which ultimately means that labor issues in the transcript, the management did allude that they were still facing that. Working capital as a percentage is still on the higher side, which is dragging ROEs to a large extent. But with large capital intensive firms like L&T, the return on capital employed of the investments that they do in a lot of projects, how these projects are transgressing and how the asset turnover for these projects is ultimately reflects in longer term averages like ROCs getting reflected on the positive side. So there will be execution challenges. There are slow moving orders. Hydrocarbons means that basically the export orders that they've got specifically on the oil and gas space, and where the international orders are almost 23 or 24% of the overall book, almost 21-22% of EBIT as well. You might see some element of receivables moving higher and execution risks staying on the higher side because of the fall in crude prices that we've seen. And because the economies that they're catering to in the Middle East or otherwise are largely dependent on oil, you might see some issues happening there, as well as the lockdown and the pandemic issues that have been faced. This is how it looks. It's obviously taken a huge hit as far as the pandemic is concerned, and it's still around its moving below its moving averages. So ideally, I think we'd like to see how the numbers come out. Numbers, as I said, are expected to be soft. The first half is going to be extremely soft for L&T, and specifically being an infrastructure player, specifically being a player in all elements where the hit was quite prominent and significant. And as monsoons have started progressing, the execution risks in the first half become very, very prominent as well, coupled with the existing elements, which will always be a drag on the earnings for not just this company, but other companies as well. So we have clearly taken a hit. How do they report numbers? I think it's going to be extremely critical. And this is how it probably gets reflected on the chart as well. KNR, again, a leading player in terms of road construction. Now, when I was going through the transcript after the results were announced, similar uh, similar comments were meted out. Labor availability around 50-60 odd percent. Very, very reasonable order book. So let's be clear that all these players have got very, very good order books. L&T order book in excess of 3 lakh crores. KNR construction order in excess of 50 odd thousand crores. Which basically means that even if orders don't come through, so let's assume that there are no orders coming in for any of these companies, at least under discussion that we have so far, L&T and KNR, for the next few quarters. They still have the revenue visibility on their trailing 12-month reported numbers of the next 2.5 years. Add to that, if you look at their leverage position, which means that the kind of debt that they have on their books is quite reasonable compared to the others. KNR, if I'm not mistaken, debt equity is around 0.13. Receivables, as I said, will go up for all these players because of the pandemic and because of the execution issues and the positioning that their suppliers will also have. So the receivable days have gone up to around 53 or 55, might be still elevated at the current level at this point of time. But even they are doing conscious efforts. So they have signed an SPA with Cube Highways for sale of 100% in KNR, Malayar, Tollways. If that goes through over the next few months, that will be a huge positive in getting its debt down as well. And they've got a good mix. So the best part is that they've got a good mix in terms of both EPC as well as the irrigation projects as well, which are higher margin projects. So you can look at how the margin for the company has been and is expected to remain in that range of 20-21%. So ROEs, as I said, will get dragged down, both in the case of L&T, KNR, and generally for a lot of infrastructure companies because of the inherent two issues of slower execution, of larger working capital constraints, of larger under absorption of fixed costs, taking a hit on cash flows and subsequently on ROEs, which is a return on reported equity for shareholders, or the return on net worth. This is how it looks on the O'Neill charts or on the charts as well in general. As for every infrastructure player, got beaten down in the market fall, still has not been able to take out its averages quite conclusively. She is better placed in terms of how numbers are, but it did have a failed breakout as well, even during the intermittent rally as well. So it is expected that numbers hit will be a given. Numbers hit will be very, very prominent on all these factors that I've discussed. Therefore, keeping a close eye in terms of how they will be able to reach through their moving averages and the presumption, because everybody is expecting that Q1, which is this quarter's numbers, are going to be a washout for most companies and most sectors as well. Therefore, I think how the entire management perspective is, specifically in the second half, as a reason of monsoons, also the first half expected to remain extremely poor. I think that entire recovery hinge probably stays rested on the second half itself. One more company, which is Thermax. I've tried to take a diverse lot as for examples. Now, Thermax is into energies like energy, right? BTG, what we call as boiler, turbine, generator segment as well. It is also into a lot more other elements of play as far as the overall infrastructure segment is concerned. Again, order book has been quite reasonable. What you're seeing in terms of reported revenues is still quite reasonable, but it's far lesser if I have a comparative check done with the other players. Now, why is that happening? Because a lot of tendering has also got delayed, either from public sector enterprises or even from the private side orders as well. Now, this has clearly led to, in terms of lower order wins, even L1. So if you're aware of the term, L1 is nothing but when you bid for that, and we are supposed to be the largest bidder or the most favorable bidder in terms of any contract that you or any project that you bidded for. So even the L1 orders probably stay in balance at this point of time. And if you probably look at both the order booking and the order balance, plus the profit after tax, it has probably remained in a range because of the sector exposures that I've got and because of the stickiness that this sector has over the past few years as well. The only silver lining that I probably see is any export orders which come through and which can have a significant impact because they still provide significantly in terms of export generations as well. And therefore, how they're able to manage that and manage the receivable position, which is going to be very, very critical for infrastructure companies, are going to be the key as a driving point going ahead. And this is about how Thermax probably looks on the chart itself. Uh, Again, moving about close to its moving averages. As we are ending this session, like we ended on Friday, it's just about to take its 100 DMA. So whether it takes that out and whether it's able to sustain that and how numbers will play out, because clearly institution ownership has gone on the back foot as far as the stock is concerned. A lot of funds have probably fled through a lot of these infrastructure stocks for obvious reasons on top line and bottom line degrowth, which might continue in Q1 as these numbers get replicated here in Q1 as well, which is going to be a case as well. And therefore, the sustainability for most of these players above these moving averages, at least the key ones, is going to be critical from a consistency of price volume and a consistency of return on investment delivery as well. You can't miss the overall leader and you cannot miss power grid. Because when you are talking about infrastructure, when you are talking about transmission, and when you are talking about power, I think this stock needs to get referenced as well. Again, stable government ownership in this, stable government entity, or regulated equity, whether it's power grid or NTPC as a whole, has held up pretty well because the kind of capex, the capital expenditure that they do, and the capitalization that they do on their balance sheets year after year determines the fixed ROEs or the ROEs from the regulated mode, which is around 15.5% that will get generated to them. So margins in this business remain extremely high, but there is also the component in terms of higher working capital that is required because they do need substantial capital investments, both from a debt and an internal accrual perspective to get invested in a lot of projects, transmission ones, consultancy ones as well, that they are trying to diversify into. So at least for the transmission projects, there is a lot more at stake when it comes to how the element of capitalization and capex evolves for all these companies. Now, the entire plan that the central government has to increase electricity share in energy to 26% over the next 2 decades from 17%, and that bodes well. Also, there have been budgetary allocations in terms of transmission lines, and again, there will be other companies and sectors at play as well. So, you will have a lot of players who Power Grid will give orders to, right? You've got the Kalpatrus, the KECs of the world, where transmission lines need to get erected and the tendering of these orders happen. It is also the balance of plant, which is a lot of equipment construction that is happening for transmission of these lines that is expected to come through, and also power cable companies. So a lot of companies in the power cabling business, which is the EHV business, the extra high voltage business, or the EPC business, as we call it, the electrical procurement business, that gets a lot of orders through that as well. So as I said, you can bind this entire equation or the entire ecosystem into a lot of such segments as well. There are a lot of order wins or order flows come through, and therefore, I think the entire crux of having a sound infrastructure development is key for a lot of other sectors and companies in play as well. The number of projects at this point of time that Power Grid has, and the kind of projects in terms of size is extremely critical as well, because the size of projects ultimately determine in terms of the return on invested capital that this company can deliver if they are able to execute it well. So lower sizes projects might entail into execution issues, receivable issues, and that can have a huge say because of the capital or the equity commitment that goes in it. Larger projects, the sanity in terms of delivering that and the undertakings which are giving those projects are largely government based. Though the receivable position might get elongated, and that gets reflected in working capital extensions, at least there is sanity in terms of the spending that you're doing upfront, being protected, both in terms of the retention money that they've got, as well as the expectations of cash flows improving as things start improving forward. Now here again, the interesting element was that it is a consistent performer, as I said, because of the capitalization, the capex element. It just failed to take its 200 DMA. Now this is a very, very integral component because 200 DMA is a very, very strong signal, but it did fail to take that. So if you look at these two bars, there's a strong bar on the upside and an equally strong bar on the downside, which means that the market is still not sure on how to position this company. And though the consistency is there, I think is the consistency good enough for the market to recognize how the entire numbers flow will happen. The other element that supports a lot of these companies is obviously the dividend yield. And with cash flows expected to remain consistent, and with expectations of tax flows remaining extremely slow and tepid this year, the dividend payouts from a lot of these public sector undertakings will still remain at extremely elevated levels. So there is an outside chance and a silver lining for all these companies that if they are able to perform, and they will, as I said, at least consistent earnings growth. Maybe it's a little bit lower, but again, dividend yield is something that will still stand out for a lot of these companies. Now, private part in terms of electrification, and why I chose this company specifically is because it is into a lot of segments at this point of time. So it is into the electrification segment, it is into the robotics segments, the motion segments, and the industrial automation segment as well. So it caters to a lot of segmental exposures that this company has, whether it's railways, whether it's the power equipment cabling segment, as I said, whether you're talking about the auto segment as well, whether you're talking about general electrification as well. The robotics segment, again, saw a sharp decline. The electrification products also had a few issues at hand, and the motion had the extreme element in terms of order flows. When you talk about ABB or Siemens, the orders at hand are still quite reasonable. So ABB, if I'm not mistaken, 4,800, 5,000 odd crores in terms of the closing order book. Siemens is close to 12,500. Again, I think Siemens in terms of railways, power electrification, electrical automation. So I think the elements that bind the industrial activities together for a lot of these subsegments at play, these private players also have a lot of exposure in the right spaces. Unfortunately or fortunately for the sector as a whole, it's always been a capital intensive sector. So the point and the moot issue that I want to drive and I'm driving is because of the capital intensity and the capital intensive nature of the business that all these companies go through, they go through an extremely good patch in a very, very good cyclical upturn period where all the investments that they've done in the past and all the projects that get commissioned at a certain stage, and if the economy is in the right direction at that point of time in a market upswing, or when the economy is doing very, very fine with no global uncertainties around as well, I think we'll see a super spurt in terms of earnings because the capex is largely behind them, and the reported numbers start coming through with the base effect in play as well. Therefore, the cyclicality in terms of the capital intensive nature of their earnings has been a known fact. In periods like this, where even before the pandemic, as I said, there were patchiness in terms of soft economic activity and numbers which were testimony to that getting reported. It might, as I said, take a toll for this year as well. But again, I think it's just a perspective that we're looking at, and it's a cycle that you need to play out very, very appropriately. As these companies will carry on their execution processes at this point of time, though with constrained balance sheets, if the period comes out over the next couple of years, 3 years, to be a better period, I think that cyclicality change will start getting reflected in reported numbers, which will show steady earnings on a quarter-on-quarter basis. And for that, a steady quarter-on-quarter improvement in performance is something to be paid heeded to. How the economy is shaping up and how the management transcripts are looking at also need to be observed very, very clearly. And therefore, we can then run these companies or invest in these companies from a cyclicality perspective. But if you're investing in these cyclical companies at the right time, I think you're going to make reasonable amount in that 1.5, 2 years that these companies have a dream run. And when they again over the next few years go into a very patchy state of mode in terms of lumpiness of reported numbers. And this is how it is looking at. And there has been strong interest as I said, because of the diverse nature of their businesses as a perspective as well. It's just taken its 100 DMA. But again, the markets would, as I said, ideally like to see how their positioning was. So before the crisis, as I said, it probably moves in a range versus expected to have reported numbers which are far more consistent. But whether it's able to take its 200 DMA, which is still a while away from the current level, and whether this consistency gets maintained because of the huge upheaval that we've seen in the market in the last 2 weeks, more specifically, I think those are aspects that need to be seen. So with this, I'll take a few questions for this particular session at hand. So I'll just take a couple of minutes before the questions get started. So Balaji has a question. Can you share the PPT to our mail ID? Yeah, I'll ask Hemal and I'll ask the marketing team to do that. In fact, Balaji, and for the benefit of everybody, if you go on to our site, right, the recordings and the PPT both are available, both on the site and the Facebook page as well. The other element also that I wanted to share with you guys is that we've come out with a information technology report, so a report on the IT sector. We've exhaustively covered a lot of aspects. So please go through that. If you are members of the product, you will get it on the site itself. If you are not, request is to please become a member. It's a very interesting perspective that we brought out for the report. We are in the process and the midst of doing a FMCG report as well. We'll be taking an analysis on the FMCG sector. So we'll come out with that report as well in the next couple of weeks. So Moto G has a question. Please share your thoughts on power sector, which is beaten down for years. So that's always been the case, right? And that's what I was explaining right now, that it's always been the case in terms of cyclicality or how you see that. Now, power comprises of three large elements, the generation part, the distribution part. So the generators, the transmitters and the distributors. Now, the classical case was that even with Uday 1 and Uday 2.0, which is getting created, the receivables at the DISCOM end were quite large. Now, PFC REC is trying to address this issue, as our exchequer has pointed out, 90 odd thousand crores meted out. And if PFC REC is able to disperse that amount and the DISCOMs are able to disperse that amount in terms of their payables to a lot of the private or the public generators as well, that will alleviate a lot of pain in terms of the working capital constraints because of the non-receivables on ultimately their books at any given point of time. Now, as that starts happening, and because of the consistency that then will come out through in terms of the reported numbers. So every element has to be taken into account. What is the sale that you're looking at per kilowatt hour, right? What is your input cost that is required? How much of landed coal are you using? What is the FOB cost of coal that is coming at this point of time? As I mentioned, a few of the companies did have captive coal mines abroad because they were very, very cheap. But there has been a royalty change, for example, for Indonesian coal mines, which has made coal a little bit more dearer in terms of shipping it out because of the increase in costs and the increase in transporting costs, which means that the FOB costs also go up higher. Therefore, the ultimate mega power project quotations that were also given in terms of the end sale of electricity per unit, the input costs which moved higher, and therefore what has happened in terms of the non-availability or provision capacities of these players to absorb the fixed cost and the operational cost at their hand, plus the receivables and working capital issues and the leverage on their balance sheet, ensure that the entire sector probably had huge amounts of cyclicality involved when it came to reported numbers. Now, there have been a few outliers as well. So if you look at a few of the private players, they've also diversified. So without any specific recommendation, you look at players like Kalpataru or KEC. So indirect beneficiaries, because they do get orders domestically, but they've also de-risked their entire model in terms of international orders as well. But there comes another risk as well with this pandemic or in general as well. If the end companies that they're catering to face some issues at their end and the receivable book starts moving higher, that can again have constraints. Though order books remain extremely high for all these private players, the outside risks always remains very, very high because of all these factors. It's a classical cyclical merry-go-round for the power sector as a whole. And I think with the disbursements happening and with expectations of demand putting up and the energy theft also, So if you look at a lot of companies, right? Have a look at Torrent Power's presentation. Just if you've got time over the weekend, the theft which happens, right? The power theft which happens, that has come up quite significantly over the past few years. So specifically in power plants like Bhiwandi that they've got, Bhiwadi or even the Thana one, the power theft has come up significantly. So even that creates a huge impact. And ultimately, it's capital intensive. So in periodicities like this, cash flows might become an issue. So yes, there has always been an issue with the entire power cycle. Motoji has a question: when do we see cyclical change in this sector? See, what has happened is that the sector obviously moves through in terms of large investments which go through at the peak. So whenever the markets are going through a very good time, a lot of capital investments and a lot of capital projects are taken up very ambitiously because of the need to cater to expected demand as we are going through that cycle, whether from an economy perspective and where investments also start flowing through because of the positive connotations drawn from the economy and the economic statistics which come out. Unfortunately, because we move in the cycle and as that cyclicality ensures that we go on the downside, and these projects are capital intensive in nature, which takes a long period of time to get rolled out, implemented, and then executed to start catering to that demand. As we fall off the cliff and as demand comes off, and if these projects come on stream during that periodicity of time, you're obviously going to see cyclicality. So the best part is that when the sector is in a downturn, right, and where the investments are happening in a very specific manner, targeted at protecting that IRRs and targeting the appropriate segments. I think down cycles is the right time probably to look at stocks within the sectors. The down cycle might continue for a few years. So that is something that we need to also time out at which periodicity of time we are in that down cycle as well. So at this current juncture, for example, we can clearly see that the next few quarters are going to get hit. The investments are going to be very slow. The execution is going to be slow. Cash flow is going to be slow. So if that is the example that is expected to take place, I think the next few quarters as we start coming out of this, and though global debt to GDP has moved up quite significantly, if demand starts coming back and if there is any sense of sanity which returns with reported numbers specifically to be observed from the second half, I think that is where our pinpoint should be. So down cycles for any capital intensive and the periodicity where you're coming very close to that end of that down cycle with every reported quarter on quarter number showing some sign of improvement, I think that is where we should be placing these companies. But from our technical standpoint, you should also be looking at the base structure which forms up from an NT perspective. Vishwanath has a question. As discussed 2 months back, seminars we saw all market falls at 4 to 5 follow through day before we regained market high. What's your view? Absolutely right. When we did this study in terms of previous crisis periods, follow through days, none of the previous crises had a V-shaped recovery like we have this time around. So this has been a unique V-shaped recovery for the markets that we've seen. Most of the previous crises did have a follow through day, but we did revert back. So the shapes that we were speaking about, right? The V shape, there was always an element of W shaped or a very shallow and a very gradual U shaped recovery as well. Therefore, this has been a very unique thing. And why is this happened? Because of the huge liquidity push from central governments and central bankers as well. So the liquidity infusion that has happened into the system, and anything or everything that goes wrong from a macro data perspective, central bankers are ready to jump in and infuse more. So there are a few central bank meetings that are expected to happen over the next couple of weeks as well, where the expectation largely is again that they'll be very supported. Bank of Japan has already done that. The expectations of ECB continuing its program is expected to continue, and Federal Reserve has already stated its intent, specifically in an election year when they're not going to take any chances as far as the entire element in terms of holding up at least the markets from an economy perspective is considered. So yeah, I think it's something where we were not expecting. A lot of people were not expecting. The last 2 weeks have been very stark, where the move has been from 9,800 to 9,900 right till 10,500. There is also a feeling of missed out in the market, the FOMO feeling as we call it. But we have to hold on to our guns. I have seen over the last 16, 18 years that markets move in cycles. So it's not like it's a lost opportunity. Ultimately, I think The good news for the market is that if a vaccine is found and if we continue this roaring bull market, there will always be positions that we can go through and take. There is never a missed chance, in my opinion, right? Because markets will keep on giving you the opportunities. But now we'll guide it in a range. So now everything will probably move out as we are taking the levels higher and higher on what developments happen on the global scale. Uh, Number of cases as a precaution in the US are moving higher. As I was reading in the night, California has reported more than 54,000 cases from 40 odd thousand. The spike in Indian cases is moving higher as well. So the hope that we've got is the placebo controlled phase 2 trials as far as the vaccine is concerned. And if those trials are successful and we go into phase 3 and any commissioning happens over the next couple of months, economic activity and restart that we've seen might have a fillip going forward because of the announcement of the vaccine. And if the vaccine comes through over the next few months and quarters, and that can create huge upheaval. But we are clearly in a very, very adjustment phase. So be prepared for volatility, be prepared for news flows which can get adverse. If it's adverse, you might suddenly see a dip in the market. But we are in a very, very broad range. So maybe 10,000, 10,100 on the downside. Every chance that, because of the liquidity infusion in the market, 10,900, 11,000 also can be seen. But there is a huge missed out feeling. So don't get affected by it. These are markets, what we've seen, in my personal history as well, will give us opportunities, and it always. PR Patil has a question: where do we find EPS growth, ROE growth as per data? It is there on the product, Mr. Patil. So if you look at the details page on the product itself, it has all the elements that you are talking about. Sumit has a question. We are following the 1987 recovery. I had tweeted this, Sumit. So if you go on my Twitter handle, what we and my team in the US also had discussed, and when at the beginning of the crisis itself, we tried to gauge in the middle of the crisis the positioning where we were. So we took a lot of old reference points, 87 crisis. We took the 2008 global financial crisis. Yeah, and it's mirrored the 87 one as well. So if you go on to my Twitter handle, I have put on a chart on the 87 one. I'll retweet that in the afternoon itself. Gopal has a question. What is your advice on bail? So no stock specific answers here, but the expectations again is that what they do with their facilities, what happens in terms of where their facilities are put to use, fundamentals and numbers, nothing to say about, right? Because have been extremely soft. Slow moving order book has gone out of their overall order book as well. So if you construe that in the overall context of things and put that in perspective, the weak execution cycle still expected to continue. Other elements at play might have an impact, but whether that has an impact on numbers, I'm not sure. Yeah, but it's moving. If you're holding on, I think trail your stop loss is what I can say. So Santosh Patel has a question: which industry group? With a lot of indigenization that is happening, you've also seen a lot of defense orders being given out, right? With what you are seeing right now at this point of time. The pain is there across for power sectors, as I said, for the entire value chain itself. But do a little bit of research. I'll just give you a few hints. So look at a few transformer players, for example. Look at a few O&M players who are doing in the private space, who are doing the balance of parts, or who are doing the maintenance activities. And obviously, I think the equipment players also. So with power equipment ban expected to take place, and with the requirement that almost 33% of our power equipment, existing power equipment, has become old and redundant. There will be need to revamp the entire components as well. So yeah, I think I've shared also a few examples in the sheet as a hint. So that group might have so. But again, I think it's a cyclical thing. So play it out, as I said, at the beginning of when that down cycle uptick will happen. So look out for numbers. Did I answer any questions? I hope I'm. Sumit has a question. Torrent Power, stage 2 stocks in these sectors you said about power. Have a look. I think, they provide to the Gujarat segment, Ahmedabad, Surat. Some PPAs still need to be signed up for them. They need still to utilize their facilities completely. But power theft, they are successful in a few of the locations that they've taken through. The other developments that have also taken place is for a few players like CSE, again as an example, they've started giving out franchises as well. So there is the power exchange that I talked about that the government is probably looking at in terms of transparency of exchange rates. There are things which are happening, but that entire cyclicality needs to get played out. So yeah, but have a look at the presentation. You will get the point that I'm trying to. So I hope I've answered any question. Did I miss anything? Or yeah, so, yeah, so Santosh has a question: how cement sector will do? So the expectation, Santosh, is again in terms of demand supply dynamics. So in terms of capacities at this point of time, the capacity utilization is close to or inching up. At least before the pandemic, it was almost 70-75 odd percent. Now with facilities and factories starting to ramp up, capacity utilizations have started improving. Monsoon is always supposed to be a soft quarter for cement. The expectation of price hikes, uh, what we've heard through our channel checks in the northern, western, and even a few of the southern markets, seems to be a case in point. What has also happened in terms of input costs, specifically coking coal, has come off. Logistic costs and the expectation in terms of uh, the captive power that they are utilizing. The captive power costs have also ensure that EBITDA holds up. Now, demand with infrastructure demand, as I said, because it will be required for a lot of infrastructure development and activities as well. Therefore, the demand pickup and utilization from the second half are expected to be extremely critical. So, cement sector over a longer period of time should do well. Few sectors, if you go on to our product stocks, are coming close to the pivot